welcome to our session. We're talking about how AI voice-powered chart audits can cover insights that traditional methods miss. So everyone in this room has participated in or seen a chart audit, which we all know is very important to understanding how a doctor is looking at a patient as they make their clinical treatment decisions. And the devil's in the details, right? We can put all of our patient journeys together. We can talk about the treatment algorithms, but when a doctor is in that office, they're looking at the patient, and they're looking at how the patient is presenting. Are they slouching? How do they walk down the hallway? When I was in oncology, that was one of the things that doctors looked at when they decided, you know what, am I gonna put this person on a chemo combo, or am I gonna kind of take a risk and risk the low ORR and get them on like something like Opdivo, right? Because that kind of thing matters to patients' quality of life. The thing about that, though, in the chart audits that we typically do, they used to be at least, mostly quantitatively driven. There were surveys, there were questions that we had about the chart that we then expected the doctors to answer. And what usually ended up happening, you would get a yes, no, maybe so kind of answer, where like, did that person have a lesion on their arm? Yes, no, maybe so. But when you're able to layer in the qualitative element into the study, you're able to get from those static answers of yes, no, and maybe so, to who, what, when, where, and why. So you go from how did the patient present with this when they made this treatment decision, to who were you talking to? Where were you? At what point did you talk to this person? And why where and why did they come to you? And this is important because whenever you have those those quantitative surveys, my least favorite question at the end of this was, but why? I would give them 36 slides of beautiful data that I built with graphs and I don't know, movements, whatever, that I built into the slide, and at the end of it, they'd be like, all that, you answered all those questions, Elle Park, you did a great job. But why is all that happening? With the chart audits that have the qualitative element where you're able to use kind of the AI moderated, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but when the AI moderation collects that information orally, the doctor, that question of can we go find out, I'm able to go find out. I can actually go dig into the data. I can hear back in the conversation or ask Rishi and his team to do it, to say, all right, so real life example, we're seeing that these doctors are using a certain treatment on someone's eyelids. That is unexpected because that kind of strength of steroid should not be used on eyelids. Why are they doing it? And when they ask, inevitably they ask, can we, and by we I mean you, go find out? I can actually do that. And yes, it is every stakeholder ever. I have never had someone not ask this question of, I have a follow-up, can we go find out? No, we don't have money or time for a follow-up call, but can you go find out anyway? So I think I probably jumped the gun on a couple of my slides, but so I'll kind of go through the actual project itself. We have a really strong foundation of insights at our company. We had all the basic things covered. What we needed was to conduct a chart audit in order to tap into some of the narrative elements that we just talked about, the who, what, when, where, and why. We wanted to understand in the way they're articulating their decision making, and we wanted to understand what was happening between their consideration and the behavioral data that we were seeing. And of course, we would then be able to gain actionable positioning and messaging guidance based on the way they thought, and then be able to capture the intelligence on the competitor positioning as well. A patient chart audit reveals all of these things: real-world treatment patterns, patient mix and segmentation, treatment sequencing, competitive positioning, market share dynamics. But the hidden drivers and unspoken barriers shaping it doesn't get covered in a quant. The structural element, sorry, I'm getting over the flu. Some of the burdens, the limitations are driven by the HCP burden of answering a giant survey of questions. We all know that the quality of data diminishes the longer the survey is. There are the incomplete insights, as I just talked about, and then there are the data quality concerns at the end. It doesn't completely answer the questions that I have of those charts. And I am questioning, did somebody just kind of like tick off the boxes because they were really tired and we just wanted to get done with it? So what Rishi and I worked on together was this conversational PCA, so the patient chart audit. We had extensive quantitative data already available. We wanted to cover the unknowns. And then we wanted to layer the qualitative depth onto the existing quant foundation in a limited time situation. So I only had, because I'm sure no marketer ever does this to anyone else, right? Where they're like, oh, I needed a project done yesterday. Can you get it done in 6 weeks? No one? No one's ever done that? No one's experienced that? Just me? Okay. This is a really lucky room. So you will occasionally have stakeholders who are facing some timeline constraints and they need the answers really fast. And this was a situation where we needed to get into the qualitative elements, and we would have done follow-up quals had we had the time, but we didn't have 12 weeks. So I talked to Rishi and he was like, I think I have a solution. I was like, all right, give it to me. Well, actually, do you want to talk to the pilot? It might take you over your section. But what I actually did was I went to Rishi and I said, here's the problem, help me understand. I know that you have some AI capabilities that you're developing at ZoomRx. Help me understand how you're going to be able to leverage that to help me.
Excellent. Thanks, Ali, for doing a great job walking through the setup. Let's look at a solution, right? Now that we're all aware of Ellie's point of view and Arcutis' point of view of what was needed. So this quote by Carl Sagan really resonates with me. And I'm sure like every market researcher, every client, stakeholders, right, are excited to find that something incredible to help clients, stakeholders make their decision. And I truly believe that with AI, now we have ways to get to that something incredible really fast and really in a compelling manner, right? And we thought really deeply about how we can apply AI, and one of the answers was that, why not make it as easy as possible to get to the information from the physician, right? And as a result, the core innovation, which is survey as a conversation, was born. I'm going to state a few super obvious things, right? We have evolved with conversation. We convey most of our key information through conversation. And I know some of you might be thinking, I do a great job with my emails, but when we think from market research and physician point of view, they have limited time, they have patients waiting for them, and we want to make it as easy as possible to get to that incredible information that is out there. And we thought that, why does this qual-quant barrier exist? Is there a way to break down this barrier? And hence the innovation, right? Now, this doesn't fundamentally change anything, right? You're able to do some AI voice-based qual interviews. You're able to drop in a small mini qual section within your tracking studies. But what else, right? Does it fundamentally solve any unmet needs in the space. And the solution was staring at us in our face, right? Chart audits. We are aware that physicians are already very used to talking out their clinical decision making with their colleagues, with their patients, and also with their recording devices that they use to later take in the notes. Nowadays, AI can also parse through those notes and add clinically relevant information within their EHRs. So we thought that this is something that is deeply embedded in their workflow. Why not use that to collect chart information? And that's the exact information that the physicians are used to talking out loud. So hence, Scribe was born. With this technology, we wanted to make sure that we don't lose anything that the traditional chart audit captures. We want to capture the basic facts. We want to make sure that we are able to trend things wave over wave, and we're not breaking trends. So we wanted to capture the basic facts. And as Elle mentioned, we wanted to layer in the additional clinical context that will help with strategic decision making for the clients, stakeholders, et cetera. So with Scribe, we use natural conversation. There's AI-guided probes. There are guardrails around those probes. And everything is sort of guided by a survey that you would typically write for a chart audit study like this. Let's look at how this works in real world. The next slide is going to be a video of a physician and AI talking to each other. A caveat, the physician part is done by a voice actor to save the physician from personally identifiable information. But the transcript that runs the conversation is from an actual data point captured in our study. So with that, let me go to the next slide.
Please share about patient information and disease characteristics. What is the patient's age?
Patient is early 40s. She's female. She is Caucasian.
What was the purpose of patient's recent visit?
She visited because of itchy scalp. Patient has commercial insurance. Patient was mild to moderate in severity, aiming more towards moderate due to the intense itching and flaking that was embarrassing to her.
What comorbid conditions does the patient have?
Patient had a history of eczema as a child, as well as hypothyroidism.
Please indicate which body areas are exhibiting symptoms of plaque psoriasis in this patient. Please take a look at the screen and let me know which options apply.
Scalp and ears. She also had a history of scattered superficial rashes, bilateral arms and legs, but not currently active.
Can you walk me through the patient treatment history leading to current prescription, starting from what was prescribed first, then next, and so on until their most recent treatment?
History of using over-the-counter anti-dandruff shampoos. Also a history of prescription strength anti-yeast anti-dandruff shampoos. Nizoral, ketoconazole shampoo specifically. Patient had also used topical steroid solutions, specifically fluocinolone.
You mentioned the patient used topical steroid solutions, specifically fluocinolone. How long was the patient on fluocinolone?
Prior to visiting me, the patient had been on fluocinolone intermittently for a year. The patient also had evidence of psoriasis on the ears, and on physical examination could see some very few scattered lesions on the bilateral forearms. Upon history, patient said she did sometimes get flaring on the face region as well. Those are areas where I would not be comfortable using fluocinolone, specifically the ears and the face, and patient had minimal success with this due to continued flaring.
Given that the patient had been on fluocinolone intermittently for a year, and you mentioned minimal success due to continued flaring, why were only steroids continued for the patient during that period?
Patient was seen by another dermatologist and came to me for a second opinion. Patient also had some hesitancy to avoid systemic therapy at this time. She was intrigued by the idea of a steroid-free topical option, did not feel that symptoms were causing impact on her quality of life enough to want to discuss more aggressive treatment options, such as oral therapies at this time. A patient wanted to trial different topical. There was also counseling done about appropriate use of topicals, application, etc.
Yeah. So with that, a few things you might have observed. We were able to capture all of the relevant patient details, the treatment history, and then also add in additional probes to really understand why a particular treatment was repeated for the patient, right? All within 3-minute time span. So we were able to collect a lot more clinically dense information within a limited short period of time, hence reducing physician burden. You also might have noticed that the physician volunteered a lot of patient information, right? A lot of information around the decision-making process and why certain things happened, something that is very difficult to capture through a traditional chart audit methodology. So we were able to get comprehensive insights. And then also in terms of data quality, a regular chart audit, you capture anywhere between 2 to 5 charts. They range from 5 to 20 minutes per chart. And I've seen 30-minute charts as well. And you can only imagine how repetitive it gets when the physician is filling in one chart at a time, one after the other. With this, we were able to collect data that was like highly dense from chart 1 to chart 3. I have personally seen countless number of data files where, when you ask why a certain treatment was prescribed or not prescribed, you get one-word answers like efficacy, safety, but it's not relevant to the patient we're talking about. Everyone knows that answer, right? Efficacy, safety. So, this adds the quality of data, it adds to the data that you would typically collect from a chart audit study. This is a feedback from a physician, right? Voice-powered patient scribe works much faster, efficiently than traditional surveys. I am able to give much more detail and complete response in a shorter period of time, so likely to get more information in my answers. So this was great to see coming from a physician. At the end of every scribe study we do, we also ask a few questions to the physicians. And this one really motivated us. Over half the physicians mentioned that they were able to actually give out more information within the same period of time. And then the other one just sent us to the moon, right? Making the process engaging and enjoyable for the physician, hence, higher quality of data. So this was great to see. With that, I'll hand it back to Elle to talk about, what we learned from the study that we conducted.
I'm going to talk through it. I won't read through the slide. I think what you essentially learn, right? Because the key is the strategic value part of it. So I think I'm just going to talk about the strategic value because I think that really defines the pilot success. So you just heard that conversation that the doctor had with the AI moderator. This was kind of disease state level stuff. Clearly, I can't share with you the proprietary things, the important things about our strategy. But I can tell you that we now know the whys behind some of the treatment decisions that we did not know before. And what this enables me to do, with 4 weeks shaved from the timeline, I'm able to go back to my marketing, medical, my cross-functional teams to say, this is what matters. In a time or in a access parity situation, and it comes down to us or the competitors, or to just kind of skip our class altogether to go on to another product, these are the things that matter. And I can tell you that with some certainty, not just because of some percentage captured through a survey instrument, but because I can hear the difference between, well, Zuri or product X, and the well, product X, because that gets captured in the way that they respond to the question. And that's something that the humans in the loop can listen to be able to make a recommendation, to be able to give you that context. And with chart audits, and just because of how time-consuming it can be, it's the number of charts that you're able to get per project with the types of charts that you want. We were able to get an N of 80 in a record amount of time. And I could trust the data that were in it because the data collected, you could tell that the HCPs were still engaged in the questions that were being asked of them. And that's the kind of data quality certainty that you don't get from a quantitative survey. I know from studies that have been done on this that, after 20 minutes, and honestly, increasingly less in this day of, social media reels that are constantly decreasing our attention span, that after a certain amount of time, I don't know that I necessarily trust the responses they're giving me to be fully, accurately reflective of how they actually feel about something. Reduce bias, I think. I think when they feel like they're talking to someone and they can justify their choices, they can rationalize, or I can provide the rationale for the decisions that they're making that may not necessarily be what others are doing, they feel more comfortable sharing that information with you because they know that what they're telling you won't necessarily be taken out of context. And I think that's really important to people who are participating in research. So again, the qualitative depth, I can't emphasize that enough. And the stakeholder value, in terms of the value that I can now bring with the data that I now have through this research, I can deliver better. And I actually now have other studies that I'm going to integrate as I present a holistic, kind of recommendation-based presentation that I wouldn't have been able to integrate because I wouldn't have known to integrate it without the qualitative layering that I was able to do in this project. So in summation, the problem is that we actually didn't know that there was a problem. We didn't really think of it as a problem. If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? And the traditional chart audits weren't necessarily broken. What I was, though, finding was an increasing demand for quicker turnarounds on studies with the qualitative context that we weren't able to get unless we were doing some kind of follow-up qual. Now that the technology exists, I felt like I'd be silly not to use it, or at least give it a try and see what happens. And I was able to get exactly what I needed from the study, and that's why our pilot is a success. Now, the learning. And Rishi's ready for this because this was a pain point. So whenever you have a human in the loop, whenever you're using an AI-generated anything, and you're generating that amount of data, you have to be staffed appropriately to go through all the data, pick up on the context that you're getting that you weren't getting before. If you're staffing it like you're staffing your traditional quant study, the back end, all the time that you save during the fielding could be taken up by the slow, kind of human-in-the-loop processing afterward. So whenever you're doing this, make sure that your research agency teams are appropriately staffed and make sure that they're able to turn around the analysis in the time required. And that's it. I'll take any questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Any questions? I know there's a lot of questions around here. Yes.
I think what you've done here is really creative, and it's a great use of AI. Obviously, voice is easier, and I have no doubt that it produces richer verbatim. But it's also a little bit difficult, or more difficult, to structure some of the data when it comes to voice. How did you handle that?
Yeah. So as Ali was mentioning, right, we collected 500 charts, each spanning from between like 8 to 15 minute long charts. And this was a lot of data to parse through. We had I think one of the key part is having the infrastructure to organize this data in a manner that is easily analyzable by humans. Right, so we have the infrastructure that sort of breaks down the conversation. It already knows what the survey is, right, how we want to look at the data, and it'll organize it in a way that would be more typical for a human to analyze. But that said, there's still a lot of things to parse through, to layer in the clinical context, to find that right snippet to really sell the insights, right, to the team. So you'll see like a bunch of charts on a chart audit study, right, like graphs. There needs to be a way to find that right snippet to use for that to sell the insights. So we have other AI-based infrastructure to analyze the data, organize the data, but then obviously there has to be, as Elle mentioned, right level of staffing to pull the information. In our chatbot, we can ask, right, hey, like, this is a slide we're building. Is there a snippet that we can add on this slide? And then it'll give us few options and then use the right snippet. So there are different ways in which we analyze the data. We had to be creative. This was relatively newer study, so we had to sort of develop, what are the barriers? Where are we spending more time? And I'm sure like over time that will become faster and easier.
Did you have ways of countering or at least flagging wherever the AI would overclean the data? Because that tends to happen with the best large language models. It's its own interpretation, especially when you're looking at complex medical language. How was that handled?
Yeah. So in the AI voice part, right, there's not a lot of interpretation. Physicians will speak their clinical rationale. That was pretty smooth in terms of like understanding some of the words. We did have to train the AI in a lot of dermatology specific language like fluocinolone and a lot of those words. We tested this a lot before launching the study to make sure that everything, even Zori, was getting pronounced in the correct manner. So that sort of took care of the voice back and forth part of it. And the analysis part of it, there's some, some sort of hallucinations, right, when it comes to parsing through the data. We were able to figure out the right number of conversations to analyze at a given time, because you give 500 charts, it's not analyzing it, in depth. So we had to like iteratively take X number of charts and analyze it in order to build the picture. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
And for any client-side folks in here, that was something that I aligned with Rishi up front. So help me understand how you're not going to let this AI destroy my credibility as a market researcher. This is a risk I am taking, help me understand. Yeah. Of course, then you have to also do the legal compliant, regulatory, all those check boxes also. I have a different presentation on that at a different conference. These are all things that I highly recommend you talk about up front. And I think this requires some proactive self-education when it comes to AI and AI utilization and market research, some of the pitfalls. There are some people who have gone through some of that journey with you, have learned the hard lessons, and there are plenty of material out there that's going to help you set up for success.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have done a drinking game on how every time you hear AI. Yeah. But I saw a hand over here somewhere. Yes.
Thank you both so much for the presentation. I have a question about AE handling. It has never come up where someone's accidentally said an AE or something, personal information not supposed to share. How do you handle that with technology?
No, absolutely. So AEs are a really big part of any chart audit studies, right? Because you're really trying to understand why a product is getting prescribed, why your product is not getting prescribed, and that is some information that you have to get to. Right? With any of the AI voice-based studies that we do have guardrails to sort of steer the conversation. So firstly, the physician has to know that before they starting the study, that how the AE reporting and all of those things happen. But then, at least from the questioning side of things, we make sure that we don't ask questions that would lead to a lot of AEs. But that said, for a chart audit study, there will be AEs that are captured. Personally identifiable information is automatically identified and blanked out, especially in any information that we're sharing with the client. We make sure that all of the personally identifiable information is beeped out and removed before sharing either the transcripts or voice recordings. And gates keep me honest on any of the answers that I'm providing.
Yeah, after AE reporting, it's still human in the loop. There's still data checks. There's still compliance with all AE reporting requirements.
Yes.
Just to follow up on this, and fully appreciate the presentation about, and the ability to deliver depth with the agility. You mentioned the guardrails at the beginning and again just now. I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about how those are established aside from AE reporting. They also tie back to the project objectives and where and how the voice moderated, AI moderated activity is followed up on and where they
Yeah. No, absolutely. So again, right, so all this is powered by a survey document, right? Survey draft as you would typically create for any study. So AI has a roadmap of all of the things that needs to be, that it needs to get through. Initially we played around with how many probes the AI will ask, right? Follow-up questions to make sure that they're satisfied. We realized that the physician experience, although we collect really rich data, there was a balance between how, annoyance and experience and making it less burdensome is the goal. And we found that good point, right? Middle ground, hey, ask one follow-up, move on. But then behind the scenes, we know that there are some questions that are really fundamental, right, to answer. Why are the physicians cycling through steroids, right? So on that, AI knows we can design it in a way that it would ask more questions, or at least one additional question. But again, the goal is collect good data and move on, right? And instead of getting stuck in the loop. And the survey that is driving the conversation takes care of that. It knows where to move from where. And as you might have seen, right, there are some questions where you need checkboxes. You need them to see a list. Those are also, populated. So generally, the entire survey is driven by an actual survey draft that you would typically build.
I highly recommend a couple rounds of soft launch, soft testing in the very upfront to make sure that that instrument, this instrument is what I'm going to call it, is really ready for prime time.
Yeah. Yes.
How do you guys do a QC check that, and then, for example, is not responding to a survey, or the physician is not giving that back?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a very important point, right? Especially in a chart audit, because if you've worked on a chart audit, you know that you collect too many charts and then do a thorough QC check and mark a lot, are abundant with all of the outliers. For this, there's also a QC check process that we developed. We have tools that pass through the conversation, and you get an index of how full the conversation is. Right? Is it 100% of data, 100% good, or is it 90% good, or is it 75% good? So it gives you sort of a sense of, you can set up a threshold at 90%, 95%, right? And you actually only sort of focus on the conversation that you believe are good, right? So the conversations that are not fully there, you don't have all of the nuances in, are sort of parsed out, and you collect conversations beyond that threshold. So that's one QC check. And beyond that, it's just, the data is organized in a way that that you would QC it similar to any other chart audit survey. Yep.
All right.
Okay. We also have, what do you call this?
QR code?
QR code that takes you to a few questions for the roundtable discussion, but are we at time? Maybe we have some more time. So yeah, please, go to the QR code. You can submit your answers. But essentially, what we want to know from everyone is, what are the barriers that you see in adoption of this technology within your company or for your clients? And then how would you go about getting that buy-in from your stakeholders to go forward with something like this? All the questions were great, and I'm sure all of those questions will come up during those discussions. But I'm curious to hear from everyone, right, about the barriers.
And if anyone has any questions about how best to get buy-in from a resistant business or a resistant team, where they're like, again, it's not broken, don't fix it. I don't trust AI, And then there are lots of requirements, I think, within every company. It kind of varies by company also, depending on their comfort and maturity level with AI. I'm happy to share with you my growing pains, my lived lessons, if that's going to help you set up for success as you go to your next chart audit.
Yeah. Also, we have a booth in the floor, so please come by, ask questions, ask away. We're there to help.